take you live to the Pentagon now. Defense Department officials announcing the final recommendation of that independent review commission looking at sexual assault in the military. Let's go ahead and listen in.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. As part of the department's efforts to eliminate sexual assault and sexual harassment from the ranks, today I am providing an important update on our implementation roadmap. This represents the department's strategic approach, as approved by the Secretary of Defense, to act on the recommendations of the 90-day Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment in the Military. We're going to make needed foundational investments to support sexual assault accountability, prevention programs, healthy command climates, and quality victim care. To date, sexual harassment and sexual assault remain serious problems in our force, with lethal consequences for our service members and harmful effects on our combat readiness. This administration has placed an unprecedentedly high priority on this challenge set. In fact, in his first day in office, Secretary Austin issued a memorandum to department leadership tasking them with reporting data pertaining to sexual assault and sexual harassment. On February 26th, at the direction of President Biden, Secretary Austin established the 90-day Independent Review Commission, or IRC. On June 21st, the IRC provided its findings and recommendations to Secretary Austin, and their comprehensive, evidence-based, and stakeholder-informed report made 82 recommendations that spanned 4 lines of effort: accountability, prevention, climate and culture, and victim care. And on July 2nd, 2021, less than 6 months after stating his intent to lead the department in countering sexual assault and sexual harassment, Secretary Austin directed this implementation way ahead. We have now created that way ahead, called the Implementation Roadmap, and Secretary Austin has approved it in its entirety. We constructed our roadmap by creating specialized teams comprising experts across the department. After reviewing the IRC's recommendations, our experts identified sequencing issues, estimated resource requirements, and characterized the risks and benefits associated with different implementation paths. Built in consultation with the department's civilian and uniformed leadership, the resulting roadmap represents a best-in-practice sexual assault and harassment prevention and response program that ensures rapid action and early and enduring results. In accordance with Secretary Austin's guidance, our approach is holistic, addressing all of the IRC's recommendations across its 4 lines of effort. We are implementing in 4 tiers of action. Our goal is to implement as rapidly as possible while ensuring we can deliver durable and meaningful outcomes. The first tier, which we have already begun implementing, is our foundation. It consists of the most important elements in preventing sexual assault and sexual harassment and holding offenders accountable. The preponderance of initiatives and resources are focused in our first tier. For instance, it contains 3 of our highest priority recommendations, including the establishment of the offices of special victim prosecutors, the creation of a full-time and specialized prevention workforce, and the implementation of full-time sexual assault response coordinator and sexual assault prevention and response victim advocate positions. Follow-on tiers build on or expand beyond these foundations. That said, our tiered approach is not rigidly constructed, and we have done it in such a way that we are able to be dynamic and expect it to evolve over time where more expedient pathways or best practices are newly identified. And make no mistake, the department is committed to completing implementation on as fast a timeline as possible, while ensuring our efforts take deep root throughout all levels of leadership, down to the unit and individual level. To that end, we are taking necessary steps in the department to ensure expedient implementation of recommendations that the administration has already proposed in legislation. Those recommendations, such as the establishment of the offices of special victim prosecutors, represent real cultural and structural shifts for the military departments. In the memorandum Secretary Austin released today, He includes 4 specific actions to ensure that the department begins to swiftly and deliberately move from the recommendations contained in the roadmap to implementation. First, he has directed the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness to issue enterprise-wide guidance for implementing all recommendations this fall, beginning with guidance on Tier 1 recommendations by October 13th, 2021. Second, each service and relevant component is directed to develop implementation plans and resource mapping by November 12, 2021 for Tier 1 recommendations and by the end of January 2022 for all actions. Third, the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness will develop an outcome metrics evaluation report by May 1st, 2022. This will be used to track the effectiveness and progress on implementation. And fourth, in consultation with the services and relevant components, the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness will formally assess the roadmap no fewer than twice per year and make recommendations to me through the Deputies Workforce Council, or DWC. The DWC, in turn, will meet quarterly to monitor implementation progress and accelerate timelines wherever possible. Countering sexual assault and sexual harassment in the military remains a priority for Secretary Austin, for President Biden, and for me. We continue to move quickly and deliberately and are committed to the path that I have outlined. Our changes are comprehensive, and they provide us an opportunity to deal a fundamental blow to this problem. As I've said previously, our service members deserve no less, and our combat effectiveness depends on our success. Thank you, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Secretary Bob Burns from AP. You made several references to moving quickly with this. So can you give us, I didn't hear you mention any dates, though. When will you have completed the implementation of Tier 1, for example?
So, including our reserve component elements, we think it could take up to 2027 to do the full implementation, primarily around these major hiring actions that we're putting forward. So this is the major prevention workforce, the focus of most of that workforce as full-time professionals on sexual assault and sexual harassment, making sure we get the right skills, not just people in jobs, but the right skill sets and expertise into these positions. That, we think, is the longest lead item in Tier 1 and probably the most important of our recommendations. For the active component, I think we'll be able to see progress much earlier in the first 2 years.
So you're distinguishing between 2027 for reserve only?
That full implementation of Tier 1 is inclusive of all elements of the force, and that reserve component moving to full-time professionals who are able to look after, for example, the National Guard, obviously across 54 different National Guard components, elements, that will take much more time. But in the first 2 years, you will see significant movement on that full-time force for the active component.
One quick follow-up. Does that, to any extent, reflect the military services skepticism about moving too quickly when?
I smile only because it does not. The military services are eager to move as fast as possible. They would like to make sure that as much as we can is in this first wave, this first tier of activity. And I think what we're trying to balance is the expert advice we've been given to make sure we do this well, that the roots have to be deep. We can't just move quickly but shallowly and have the figment of action without having really well thought through processes for how we do this. The DoD efforts in this space will be the largest ever attempted. No university, no major institution is at our scale. So building a workforce, a prevention workforce, building the accountability approach very specifically around sexual assault, sexual harassment, and related crimes, this will be a first of its kind endeavor. We want to move fast, but we want to make sure that these changes last and we build back that trust in the force.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
David? So I understand the priorities that you laid out and the deadlines you gave. Do they still require legislation? And I have a follow-up after that.
Sure. Most of the actions that I've described we can do ourselves. There are some key elements we have asked Congress to help us with. The first and most important is the change to the Uniform Code of Military Justice to expand a group of activities or offenses, around sexual assault, sexual harassment, and related sexual offenses, and put those outside of the chain of command under these offices of special prosecutors. So these offices also, we are asking for legislative assistance to develop those offices. Those are probably the two most important elements for which we need legislative relief. Building out the prevention workforce, we need Congress's help on funding it and making sure we have the particularly civilian workforce ceiling to hire people, but mostly we can do that within our own authorities.
And you mentioned coming up with metrics by May of next year. Mm-hmm. Don't you already have metrics in the annual sexual assault report? Aren't you going to know the next time a report comes around whether or not you're having any impact?
Those kind of metrics, you're right. We do have metrics that help us understand the rate of reporting, for instance, on sexual harassment, sexual assault. What we're looking for is how to measure the quality of this workforce, the particular, the steps in the process, I think is how I would put it, for how we understand how to scale the challenge. For instance, the size of the unit level at which we need a dedicated professional, how we think about the offices of special prosecutors in each military department. That's the level of metrics we're talking about.
And would you expect to see any change in the annual sexual assault harassment report when it comes out next spring as a result of this?
Well, I don't expect as a result of this we will see it as soon as the spring. We also have not had the change of the chain of command yet through Congress. So we certainly are looking to make change as fast as possible and see change in those statistics as fast as possible. Where I think we will see more immediate effect to that point is more along the lines of what the Secretary's already put into action beyond what was from the IRC recommendations. He had a series of actions right away. So you can think of the Fort Hood report, for example, and the follow-on actions taken there. So, for example, we are already looking hard at installations across the force to understand where there are installations that are doing particularly well, and where there are some installations where we need to send focused help. So where we take that prevention, sexual assault, sexual harassment prevention workforce that we have today and send them out, think of flyaway teams, to help at the installation level. Those sorts of actions are already underway, and I do hope, in fact, that they will have effect on the statistics we next see.
Last one will be Therese.
Yes, thank you. I'm Therese Garnier with Newsy. I've spoken to a few military investigators, and one of the issues that they have brought up was the fact that if an offender is kicked out of the military for other than honorable discharge, once they're out, they can apply to get that changed to honorable, which will impact wherever they apply for jobs. Is that one of the issues or recommendations that's going to be worked on through this new program? Are they going to try to adjust that or fix that, or has that been discussed at all?
Yeah, I would have to look into that. That was not one of the IRC's recommendations to change that policy. It has not come up to my level thus far in our relook at how the department addresses this issue, but I'm happy to look at that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.
You've been listening to Deputy Secretary of Defense Kathleen Hicks there, taking the military chain of command out of the prosecution of sexual assault cases. That's one of the headlines there out of the Pentagon this hour as the IRC makes its new recommendations to prevent sexual harassment and sexual assault within our military and among our ranks. For more, let's bring in senior Pentagon reporter Luis Martinez, also Stephanie Ramos, who has reported on this issue extensively for us. She is on the phone as well. Luis, let's start with you. Let's lay out what we heard and the new roadmap here going forward.
That's right, Kara. What we're talking about today is the roadmap to implementing 82 recommendations that this IRC, this Independent Review Commission on Sexual Assault in the Military, issued in early July. Back then, we heard President Biden say that he would fully support taking the chain of command outside of sexual assault cases. The prosecution decision would be moved to special victims prosecutors. And so the decision that you heard today was how the Pentagon is going to do this over the coming years. They have a phased approach. A lot of mumbo jumbo, a lot of jargon there in this briefing. What you heard was Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4. What are we talking about? We're talking about the most important of those 82 recommendations being implemented in coming years very, very quickly by the Pentagon. What they're saying is that, yes, taking the chain of command out of the prosecution of sexual assault cases is going to happen, but it's going to require congressional assistance. We know that the House and the Senate are both working up versions, so they just have to work out the details. But the Pentagon says that they're giving themselves 5 years in which to implement these changes, mainly because it takes time to train and educate this new class of prosecutors. It's going to take time to implement this on the reserve side of the military, not just the active component. Then they're going to phase in the second tier, which builds in on what was already implemented over the next couple of years, and on and on. So they have a roadmap in place. You heard some of my colleagues here at the Pentagon asking, why is it going to take so long? And the Pentagon's answer is they don't see it as taking too long at all. They say that this 5-year plan is actually not a target date. They want to get it done before then. They know that they have to get action from Congress when it comes to taking the prosecutions away from the chain of command, and they're waiting on that. But they're also not waiting on other things. There are things, a majority of those 82 recommendations can be done by the military on its own. But there are 3 things that they really want, which is taking out the chain of command, professionalizing the sexual assault prevention officers, and training a prevention workforce. Those are the 3 main recommendations that came out of that commission back in early July. What we heard today is how they're going to do it. It sounds like it's going to be phased in, maybe not too, it's not maybe going to please everybody up on the Hill, but at least they are working on it very quickly.
And Stephanie, as Kira said, you've reported on this issue extensively. You're a decorated veteran of the United States Army. And I just want to ask you, look, we've been hearing zero tolerance from the military for decades. The tailhook scandal, that must be 30 years ago almost now. So speaking as a woman who served our country in uniform and as a reporter who's covered this, what do you make of what you've just heard?
Well, Terry, it's clear that the family, the Vanessa Guillen family, has built this momentum to bring about change. I mean, we saw the independent review come about because of these questions and concerns voiced by the family members, Congress, various Hispanic advocacy groups during the investigation into the disappearance and murder of Specialist Vanessa Guillen. But it is going to take some time, but it is a step in the right direction. The committee, as Louis just mentioned, examined the command climate and the culture there at Fort Hood. They've already found that an outside agency should be investigating sexual assault and harassment reports. But now with this latest briefing, by this fall, the military is looking to implement those changes. And that's big for the military. As you know, it takes time for there to be change within this institution. But this is something that the family has been watching closely. I spoke with Vanessa's sister over the weekend, and they are still distraught that it has taken so long for change to come in Vanessa's name. But hopefully this gives them hope that these comprehensive changes will curb sexual assault in the military.
Louis and Stephanie, I think both of you could answer this. Maybe, Louis, I'll start with you. Just putting it in layman's terms for folks that may not understand military speak and the chain of command. History has shown it's usually men in these high-ranking positions. A woman in the military who is, under the command of a man is sexually harassed, sexually assaulted. She goes to her leader. That leader is supposed to go up the chain of command. Usually men, and usually those situations have been ignored or not taken seriously. So let's put in perspective with men clearly taking the majority of the high-ranking positions. This is a big deal because in order for women to feel safe in the military and to feel protected, that if indeed they are harassed or they are assaulted, they've got to have trust in who is in positions of leadership to take their concerns, their complaints seriously, so something will be done. And as Stephanie points out, Vanessa Guillen tried to do that, and those complaints were ignored, and she ended up losing her life.
Now, Carrie, everything you laid out are things that have been of concern by members of Congress, by sexual assault victims advocates, by veterans groups for a very long time. The idea that if you are a sexual assault victim, you may be afraid to step forward. Why? Because of concerns that you might face retaliation either from your commanding officer or even potentially from your peers. That's the one that's of most concern. And so because they talk about unit cohesion, whether the unit can stay together through tough times. Well, in situations of sexual assault, what we've seen is that there is hesitancy among female sexual assault victims, among male sexual assault victims, about stepping forward because of concerns that maybe their commander may not do something. You're right. It's definitely a different language. The military has its own legal system. It's called the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Under the current system, which is now being reformed, eventually through, possibly through congressional action, what you're going to see is that what happens right now is that if you step forward, there's a process a criminal process that takes place with prosecutors, but ultimately it is your commander in your unit who decides whether this prosecution should move forward into a criminal case. And so that's one of the reasons why advocates have said it's intimidating for somebody to step forward and do something like that. So by taking it away from the chain of commander and by establishing these special victims prosecutors, the idea is that more people will be more comfortable in stepping forward to with allegations that need prosecution, because right now we get these annual surveys that indicate that the numbers of sexual assault continue to rise. There have been dips in recent years, but the trends continue going upward. And the irony is that when we talk to sexual assault victims advocates here at the Pentagon, what they say is that it's a good thing that the numbers are rising, and the numbers of reports. I should be careful in stating that, because what they're talking about is that means that more people are comfortable in stepping forward with these allegations of assaults that have happened to them. They don't want this to remain in the dark. They want this to be taken care of. And so it's very complicated, and this is something that advocates have been pushing for quite some time. Now it's happened. The debate is going to be in Congress about how far to go with it, but you're seeing today from the Pentagon that they've had these recommendations. They know they need to implement them. They want to implement them quickly, and their game plan is for over the next couple of years, you are going to see some changes.
And Stephanie, it's one thing to change policies and procedures and even laws. It's another thing to change culture. That's much harder. Changing culture so that women feel safe, equal, and able to flourish in many institutions, including ABC News, that is a challenge. So when you think of the military culture, which is so specialized and traditional, do you get a sense that it is changing for the better?
It's a slow process, but it is. And what we heard today is a start. It is a difficult task to change the culture because these classes for soldiers to put in place to prevent sexual assault, those have been in place for years. And as Louis mentioned, there have been dips in the sexual assault harassment reports, but it is still an ongoing problem. And the military recognizes that. They have recognized it for years, but what has come of it? These programs here and there that haven't made much of an impact. So here we are. We're looking at these changes that were just presented by the DOD. You heard from the secretary that it will take a few years before we see full implementation, but they have some major hiring actions ahead to create this prevention workforce. It's going to take some time to see these changes implemented and then to see them actually make a difference. But I think it gives the military as a whole, servicemen and women, hope that their leaders are trying to make a difference and trying to bring about change after the horrific murder of Vanessa Guillen.
Absolutely. Stephanie Ramos and Louis Martinez, thanks very much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.